Hi, I'm Stephen Downs.
And I'm Adam Risby.
And this is Letters to the Sky, a podcast about the metaphysical iconoclasts, philosophical visionaries, and religious leaders of the world.
Whether you consider yourself religious, spiritual, neither, or something in between, we invite you to take a deep dive with us down metaphysical rabbit holes and learn to see your life from a new perspective. All right. Welcome. It's been a while.
Adam?
2 months?
It's been at least 4 years, I think.
That's roughly equivalent to the actual time, which has been more like 2 months.
You know,
I think.
it's interesting because in that 2 months, we have literally seen each other for a week. We spent a week with each other. You came out here to Colorado, and it still feels like it has been forever and that we haven't seen or talked to each other in forever, despite the fact that we have seen each other relatively recently.
That's true, actually. Yeah, prior to me coming out to see you in Colorado, we hadn't seen each other for, I think, a year and a half because of the pandemic.
Yeah, the
Amazing.
before time.
The before times and the after times.
All right. Well, thanks for your patience, and good to be talking about this stuff again.
Yeah, tell us what we're going to talk about
We're
today.
talking about Rumi's Little Book of Life. The subtitle is The Garden of the Soul, the Heart, and the Spirit. It is translated by Mariam Mafi and Azima Melida Kolin. And the introduction is by Narges Farzad. And yeah, we wanted to do Rumi, and we wanted to make sure we did, a translator, a reader who was familiar with the culture that Rumi came from, even though Rumi was quite a while ago now. So we chose this edition in particular, but we're going to get into a little bit about who Rumi was and his story, because he has kind of a really beautiful, I would almost say at this point, like a classic transformation story of being very much into the world and then all of a sudden meeting a teacher and, having his life change. And then we're going to talk about what a teacher provides, and we're going to get into it. I'm looking forward to this one because talking about the teacher-student relationship is probably one of my favorite topics. So I will let you take it away.
Well, one of the things I want to pull up was just who the author and translators are. I just wanted to read the inside cover here so people had a sense of who reviewed this material. So the translator is Mariam Mafi. She's born and raised in Iran, is an experienced Persian translator who studied in the U.S. and has translated a variety of scholarly and poetic works since 1989. And the co-translator is Azima Melida Kolin, is a poet, concert pianist, and artist who studied in Rome and Geneva. So we have some amazing people. I also remember pulling up various books on poetry. Obviously, the Coleman Barks version came up. There's another one. I think I have it on the back here. Love Poems of God. I have it somewhere in my bookshelf here. There's various translations of his work, but this one was highly rated, and it's sort of pocket size and small. I mean, if you're seeing the video,
it's quite
somehow
small.
It's quite small and very, very manageable. It's like one poem per page. It's a great sort of nightstand book.
It is. Except, I think his poetry deserves more than a brief glance at night. It's really something you can sit with for a long time and ruminate in.
Yeah. So out of curiosity, but before diving into Rumi, what was your understanding or impression of Rumi? What had you heard about him?
My understanding of Rumi, and I still, feel like I don't know much about him, is that he was a Sufi mystic, kind of one of the more famous mystics, like spiritual mystics that certainly like a Westerner might have heard of. And that he is famous for his poetry and his use of the like romantic language. So he uses a lot of like the words like beloved and love, and he really talks about the relationship between God and the mystic. And it's really it's extremely powerful, and it's like very, you can see his find his poetry a lot of different places, and there's definitely different levels of understanding and commentary on it. From the very mundane, and just in terms of like, the gray between the black and white of morality, or really deep non-dual experiences. You can kind of go both ends of the spectrum with his poetry, and it kind of speaks to everyone. And so that's really what I knew about him. I feel like, because this is the book does have in the foreword a little bit about Rumi and his life in the 1200s, but like I still feel like I don't know that much about him. I feel like he's really known as his poetry.
Yeah.
And I still feel like Sufi. I mean, one of the reasons I wanted to do Rumi, in particular, is because I know we had a really great conversation about Muhammad and the founding of Islam, and I really wanted to get into the practice. And I know that Sufism is really the mystic branch, so to speak, of Islam in terms of like, organization, organized Islam. Not that there aren't mystics in all its branches, but it's the more classically like mystic sect, so to speak. So I wanted to learn about it. I want to learn about the practice and about, where this comes from.
Yeah, it's great. I do remember when I was in college and I studied Sufism as part of my religion major, I was reading from a commentator. I don't recall his name at the moment, but I recall how silly some of his arguments were. He was talking about two mystics, Jalaluddin Rumi and Omar Khayyam, and specifically from the Rubaiyat of Omar Khayyam. And for those interested, if you're interested in Rumi's poetry, you may also be interested in Omar Khayyam's poetry as well, specifically his Rubaiyat. But this philosopher or commentator was saying that Rumi and Omar Khayyam do Islam a great disservice because they promote hedonistic lifestyles. They speak of drinking wine constantly. I can only imagine the inebriated poet stumbling through the streets. Something like that. And I remember reading that. I was like, wow, how dense do you have to be to read this poetry where he speaks about drinking the wine from the beloved and being drunk with bliss, to not get that it's symbolic. I remember shaking my head, very disappointed in whoever that was.
I'm sure that's a lot of people, unfortunately.
Yeah. So, needless to say, when, as you mentioned, when this poetry speaks of the divine and falling, sometimes the poetry is very sensual, right?
It is.
He's not talking about sex. He could be, but I think the point is it's symbolic about this immensely sensual experience with the divine. And when he talks about getting drunk with the wine from the beloved, he's talking about one's relationship with the divine, and that's really the mystic path, right? Is this developing a one-on-one relationship with the divine, with God, source, self with a capital S.
I agree.
So, well, let's do some due diligence here and talk a little bit about who Rumi was. I will start with good old Wikipedia. Rumi, also known as Jalaluddin Muhammad Rumi, or as he is sometimes known as Maulana. Maulana or Mevlana means our master in many traditions, in many religions, or I should say in many languages. He was born in, it looks like, the 30th of September, 1207, born in a village in what is present-day Afghanistan, and died at the age of 66 on the 17th of December, 1273, in Konya, which is present-day Turkey. That is that. So 13th century.
Traveler.
Yeah. Interesting that he I think he's now officially the most popular poet in the West or in the U.S.
I would believe that. I would absolutely believe that. I have no trouble buying that one. Yeah, he's got probably like hundreds of versions of his works that have been translated by different people, and they're all, they probably sell pretty well still.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Who would have thought? Some jurist, Muslim,
right? So
mystic.
let's talk a little bit. You want to share a little bit about his background? Should we dive into this?
Yeah. Tell me what's on your mind.
Well, I mean, I know that he was someone who grew up, like you said, he studied jurisprudence, so like the law, and he was very much into the world, and in the, because it was an Islamic culture, Islamic law, not the American sense of secular law,
Right, Sharia.
yeah, right, yeah, Sharia. So he studied kind of the contemporary Islamic way of the world through law, and he was a bright person. And then one day he had an accidental run-in with his teacher, his would-be teacher. And I would actually love you to tell us a little bit about that, because I think you have a little bit more information on it than I do.
Yeah, I love those stories. I think one of the contexts to create before diving into his meeting with the famous Shams Tabrizi is his relationship with his father, right? Because a lot of times the teacher, our very first relationship with some sort of authority is our parents, right? His father was his spiritual, not only his like the authority of the household, as is common in that culture and tradition, but he was also his spiritual authority. He was his first guru, if you will. He was his first spiritual teacher, and actually was teaching him to take over his role in that mosque where he was being raised. And his dad died at the age of, when he was 25, that's kind of young. He's still young, he's still very impressionable. And so he then took over the role of being the lead of the mosque of the village. But his father's disciple, one of his father's disciples, took over the role of guiding Rumi. Just for completion's sake, Rumi's father's name was Bahauddin Walad. He was a theologian, jurist, and also a mystic. He died when Rumi was 25, and then his disciple took over the role of being the spiritual guide for Rumi for another 9 years. And then at the age of 34, he dies, this disciple of his father, who, probably played a father figure role as well. So he's had now 2 deaths of not only father figures, but spiritual teachers. And I can only imagine he's in this place where he needs to transform. He needs to really step into his manhood and his taking on the role of a teacher. So he then becomes the master for that mosque and for that village. And granted, I don't know very much about his life, but my impression is that he really sticks to being a jurist. It focuses on Sharia. He gives out laws and guidance to the villagers, but it comes from a place of intellectual understanding, right? I would say his heart hasn't fully opened up yet, his spiritual heart.
Right.
Until he meets Shams Tabrizi. So Shams, interestingly, in Arabic, or so I've been told because I don't speak Arabic, means sun, which if you read his poetry, he often refers to Shams, the great light, the great sun who guides me. So he meets the sun, if you will, while on a road. So I'm going to give a couple of versions of the story, 2 versions. Both of them are beautiful and highly symbolic. And I'd love your thoughts on this, Stephen. Okay, So here's the first version of their meeting. One day, Rumi was reading next to a large stack of books. Shams Tabrizi, passing by, asks him, "What are you doing?" Rumi scoffingly replied, "This is knowledge that cannot be understood by the unlearned," implying, of course, that Shams was unlearned based on how he looked. On hearing this, Shams threw the stack of books into a nearby pool of water. Rumi hastily rescued the books, and to his surprise, they were all dry. Rumi then asks Shams, "What is this?" To which Shams replies, "Maulana, this is what you cannot understand. It is knowledge that cannot be understood by the learned."
Oh man,
is that great?
oh, I love it.
I love that. So I would love your thought. Well, tell me what occurs to you when I share that story, and then I'll share the second one.
What occurs to me is just the fact that all of, what this whole podcast is about, what we talk about, what we love discussing, like, it has to be experienced. You can't read about it and understand it. You can't, it will never be found in a book. And it is, this is one of the reasons it's so hard to acquire, because it's only acquired through effort and practice. And what am I going to say? I mean, I'm just trying to find the words for it because it's so beautiful. Like, it costs so much. It costs everything that we think is valuable. It costs our who we think we are, who we want to be, who we, not in a like, you'll never be those things, or that who you are in the world doesn't have any significance, but like, it has no bearing whatsoever. It has absolutely no bearing. And in fact, oftentimes it's a trope that the people who are have the most social status are typically the ones with the hardest time really committing to this path, because it costs, when you chase social status, you are afraid of losing, one of the things about social status is you're afraid of losing it. And that's what this costs. It costs not even that you have to lose it, but it costs the caring. And that's really hard for a lot of people. So, I mean, this sounds exactly right. It sounds exactly right. I mean, we'll do an episode on Patrul Rinpoche, who is a Tibetan, very similar.
Oh,
very,
so
very
similar.
He absolutely made fun of and like did not care about academic learning and about status in particular, not even academic learning, but status in particular. And yet his students were some of the greatest, like organizational lamas. They were head of schools, the head of monasteries, and they had great status, and they would all kind of crumble before him, and he was a beggar. So, that's right. That's what comes to me, is it's just, yeah, it's not something you can't learn it through books.
Yeah, there's so many things that come to mind for me. Well, one, Shams was, like Patrul Rinpoche, a beggar in certain ways, did not wear fancy clothes, was wearing rags, in what appeared to be rags. He was a weaver of sorts. He did odd jobs. He was a dervish. He would dance, listen to music. Like, very much, you get this impression of someone who's a wanderer, and also, like Patrul Rinpoche didn't have a place he called home. He just went from, village to village, just wandering the countryside of Tibet.
Yeah. Okay. So that's version one.
That's version one.
That's
version one.
I want to hear version two.
So, version two. In the marketplace of Konya, amid the cotton stalls, sugar vendors, and vegetable stands, Rumi rode through the street, surrounded by his students. Shams caught hold of the reins of his donkey and rudely challenged the master with two questions. Who is the greater mystic, Bayazid, a Sufi saint, or Muhammad, meaning the prophet of Islam, right? Shams demanded. Rumi responds, what a strange question. Muhammad is greater than all the saints. Then Shams responds, so why is it then that Muhammad said to God, I didn't know you as I should have, while Bayazid proclaimed, glory be to me, how exalted is my glory, which is to say he claimed the station of God himself. Rumi explained that Muhammad was the greater of the two because Bayazid could be filled with the capacity, or could be filled to capacity by a single experience of divine blessings. He lost himself completely and was filled with God. Muhammad's capacity was unlimited and could never be filled. His desire was endless and he was always thirsty. With every moment, he came closer to God and then regretted his former distant state. For that reason, he said, I have never known you as I should have. It is recorded that after this exchange of words, Rumi felt a window open at the top of his head and saw smoke rise to the heaven. He cried out, fell to the ground, and lost consciousness for an hour. Shams, upon hearing these answers, realized that he was face to face with the object of his longing, the one he had prayed God to send him. When Rumi awoke, he took Shams's hand, and the two of them returned to Rumi's school together on foot. Beautiful.
Yeah, also a beautiful story.
There's a couple of things that occur to me in that story. One, it needs to be unpackaged a little bit, because if I have some listeners who are Muslim and who are not Sufi, that can be very sacrilegious. That whole story. A couple of background points. One, there's a long tradition of Sufi saints declaring that they are God. One of the most famous of Sufi mystics, Mansur al-Hallaj, is known to have said, Ana al-Haq, which means I am the truth. And that is so blasphemous to some Muslims, because you're declaring that you are God. But for those who have studied mystic traditions, you know that there's a point where the ego itself dissolves. The sense of I, the sense of separate self dissolves, and all that's left is the raw, unbridled nature, fundamental nature of reality, which you could call God. And when that's the only thing in the field of awareness, then the natural exclamation is to say, I am that. Right? I mean, you even have that famous book by Nisargadatta Maharaj called I Am That. Literally, I am that. So I think it's important to understand that when they're talking about this guy, Bayazid, and Muhammad, and Bayazid claiming that, I am equal to the station of God, that's the background with which to hear that statement. And then Rumi taking it a step further, saying, no matter how many experiences of God Prophet Muhammad had, there was always more to be had. And it's almost like there's a certain level of humility that he is acknowledging, which then, of course, filled Shams with a great sense of recognition that, okay, this is the disciple I wished and I asked for.
Yeah, I think I just echo everything you said. I got nothing else on that. I got nothing else for that story. I agree with you.
Yeah. Well, I think I can't help but think of the meeting between Paramahansa Yogananda and his guru, Sri Yukteswar. They were... I can't recall what city. I want to say Serampore, but I don't remember.
I don't recall.
Yeah. He was walking down a street, and he, out of the corner of his eye, looked to the right or left down an alleyway and saw Sri Yukteswar in the distance, and there was this sense of recognition, and they both just knew, oh yeah, you're the one I'm supposed to meet. And I find that very peculiar. You see that sense of recognition being reported in so many traditions. I imagine in the Buddhist tradition too, there's stories of that kind of thing.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, I mean, very much so, especially in, I mean, yes, yeah. But I mean, yeah, absolutely. Well, I mean, we're 28 minutes in. Do you want to read some poetry?
Let's do it. Quote off.
Quote off. All right. I mean, I had a lot marked in this book, all throughout the book, looking at my marks here. I think I can't find it. I was looking for it right before when we were talking, but Rumi was talking about his poetry being dead as soon as he uttered it. And
wow, that's good.
It was really beautiful because this is a book of his poetry, so it was very apropos. But is there anything? Do you want to dive into one of yours that you picked, and we can talk about it?
Yeah. I'll do. If you're following along, this is from page 147. Last night, I dreamed myself as empty of self, and fainted from the glory. The beauty and grace of emptiness intoxicated me till dawn. I saw this precious poverty as a mine of ruby, and its hue enfolded me in red silk. I heard cries, "Drink, drink now," from the ecstatic circle of lovers, and felt the ring of the beloved on my ear. 1,000 voices shouted from the surging sea of spirit, and my soul rose in ecstasy. I think what I liked about that is, one, this allusion to the beauty and grace of emptiness, which we've already spoken about a little bit here. And, the two things that I had mentioned earlier about being drunk, right? Drinking of the divine, and being surrounded by lovers and the beloved, the ring of the beloved. And it's very, like I said, this is very sensual. 1,000 voices shouted from the surging sea of spirit. Like, first the alliteration, well done to the translators, well done. But just a beautiful image. Like he mentions the red silk, and then the drinking, and I could just see this energy. It's beautiful.
All right,
your turn.
All right, let's see. I'm going to read the one on the opposite page, 146, because that's one I had marked. It's much shorter. Love rushed into my veins, emptying me of myself. Now filled with the beloved, my only possession is my name.
Ooh, my only possession is my name. That's very interesting.
Yeah, for me this one really touched me just because of the power of that divine love, the power of when you really unlock something in the heart, how it's just completely overwhelming. And I love it, the emptying me of myself, that reminds me of, all the things that I thought were important, not being important anymore. Those kind of who I thought I was, for lack of a better word. And then, now filled with the beloved, my only possession is my name. And I feel I've definitely had moments like that when I felt that like there was nothing left except what people have to reference me by, because they have to reference something. And that is just my name. And so I and that's not really something that can, you have to use some sort of language. So that I really love that one.
Yeah, that's a really good point. When there's no one left, there's still someone in the world, right?
Yeah.
And they get a name.
Yeah.
I love that. That's a great reminder of what happens.
You got another one?
Yes. All right. Okay, this I like because, I'll just read it. page 148. There's a series in a row there that are just really good. If you only knew what bliss I found in being nothing, you would not advise me how to live. When the sword of nothingness ends my life, I will laugh at those who mourn my death.
I love this one. I love this one too. I had that mark.
What it does for me when I read this, what I noticed is I felt at peace. Something in me relaxed, because I do have I have some, like I think every human being have trepidation when I think of death, when I think of losing someone. And certainly trepidation when it comes to my own death. I wonder, will I feel happy with the life that I have lived? Will I die in a state of contentment and gratitude and peace? I certainly would like to think so, but there's a little, if I'm honest with myself, there's an apprehension about that. And when I read this sentence, I will laugh at those who mourn my death, I feel like, what state does one have to be in to say that, to say those words, where laughter is the response? It takes me to that place, and it helps me to see past things that I think are important.
Yeah, I think for me something similar. The first two lines are really for me separate than the next two, not like completely, but like I got like layers of meaning from each. So those first two, if you knew what bliss I found in being nothing, you would not advise me how to live. I think this is this for me has, I definitely relate to this. I've had times when I'm so engrossed in that what if you call it, oneness, non-dualness, it doesn't matter, but that, and if you're around people who have no relationship to that, or have especially when you're around people who know you, right, who like know you not as that, but as like for Stephen, like they know Stephen, and nothing's changed for them. Nothing's changed for who you appear to be to them, but inside of you, everything's changed. And it's kind of that, if you knew what this was, you wouldn't be like judging me and advising me on what choices I'm making, because they have nothing to do with who I really am. And so that I related to that. I thought that was really beautiful, and kind of comes back to the, like, it's so outside of what you think it is, and what, it's so outside of everything that we're told is important, and everything that we're told it means something significant. And I really thought that those two lines captured that well. And then the next one, when the sword of nothingness ends my life, I will laugh at those who mourn my death. So I feel like this is a little playful, because when the sword of nothingness ends his life, so he's already spoken about being nothingness, and now there's a sword of nothingness that's ending his life, but there's nothing. Oh. So like it's a sword of nothing ending nothing, so it's like still an end, but like nothing's actually happened, nothing's changed, there's nothing. I will laugh at those who mourn my death. So this comes those who think it's something, and I don't know that I've ever felt like I would laugh at people. I've definitely made comments about dying in grotesque ways to shock people, but
of course you did. That's a very Stephen-esque thing to do.
I love that one. Okay. Let me get one in here. Ooh, I love this. I actually love this one. This is very down the sensual road. This is from page 121. In love, ask for madness. Give up reasoning. Give up life. Look for dangerous adventures in deserts filled with blood and fire.
Ooh,
I love that.
Oh, the imagery.
Yeah, it's a beautifully translated piece. I think it'd be very easy to you could literally read this as, in romantic love. I'm not sure, without knowing, I don't know that that's what Rumi was referring to, but the similarities between, the give up reasoning, give up life, as in be for that moment only. The reasoning, the preservation that keeps you around, normally, like, give those things up and just give yourself to love completely. And I thought that was so beautiful and powerful. And then, look for dangerous adventures in deserts filled with blood and fire. I love that because it's just there's a wildness to that, which that's really, I think that's part of the mystic experience for a lot of people, is really coming out of that shell of posterity. Like, is that the right word?
The shell of austerity?
Yeah, but the shell of, like, what you're supposed to do, like,
oh yeah,
like if you want to be technical, antinomian behavior. There's a wildness to it, and I love that. I just love that poem. That's very vivid and visceral. I think it's beautiful.
That's great. All right, I got one for you.
Okay, I'm ready. What page?
Page 85. I like this. I'd like to say this is for all those out there who feel like heaven and hell are actual places where you go to. Once a believer asked the angel of the gate, "Is it true that hell is the road through which both believers and unbelievers pass? For on my way here I saw neither smoke nor fire." "The road you passed was hell indeed," the angel smiled. "But since you have overcome your lower nature, to you it appears as a garden. Having planted the seeds of devotion, you transformed the fire of anger into compassion, and ignorance into wisdom. The thorns of envy have turned into roses, so now your fiery soul has become a rose garden, where nightingales sing praises." What I like about this is, one, it suggests that one's soul, I think this is very similar to Saint Teresa of Avila when she describes the soul as this great castle. Within your soul is heaven and hell. You could see. And depending on what happens in your soul, whether you have planted seeds of devotion, whether your thorns of envy have turned into roses, like whether the fire of anger is turned into compassion, whether the work has been done, you will experience hell or you will experience heaven. And the other thing I like about this is, yes, it's symbolic, but it really, for me, when I read this, it immediately makes me think, have I turned my anger into compassion? Have I turned my ignorance into wisdom? Like, it's a call to action. I don't need to wait till I'm at the gates of, heaven and hell talking to an angel. Like, I can do this now. I can step into heaven now, which sort of is how I like to view heaven and hell, as states of awareness, states of consciousness, that we don't have to wait to go to. We can be in either one now, depending on how we respond to things in our life.
Yeah, I agree. I hadn't marked that one, but I'm glad you read it out. I've often wondered, I feel like it's a personal decision in terms of where does morality come into it? Because a lot of times it's easy to talk about, heaven and hell in terms of morality, in terms of behavior that gets you one place or the other. And, Rumi here is speaking about transforming what is there. So whether it's hell for some people, it's heaven for him. And that's been my experience, where, it is completely up to you on what your view of something is and what you experience something as. In those moments, whether it is comfortable or uncomfortable doesn't matter anymore, right? Whether your situation that you find yourself in is something you would have historically called positive or negative, comfortable, uncomfortable, doesn't literally has no bearing anymore. You're perfectly comfortable in the most inhospitable, circumstances, and I think for everyone it's different what exactly that looks like, because you want to. I think it's from there it's easy to get into the trap of like nihilism and thinking that, well, nothing matters because it's all heaven, or for you, so like there's nothing to do or change. And I think that's at the ultimate level that's true, but like he said before, all that's left is your name. You're still like in a body, and if you don't eat, you'll die. and there are, I before all the not that we have people who love scoring technical points, but before people mention siddhas, I just want to say that they have there is no direct line between siddhas and non-dual awareness.
What are siddhas?
Excuse me. Siddhas are spiritual powers. So there's a lot of,
Siddhis.
Oh, fair enough. Excuse me. Yeah, siddhis. Oh god, siddha is the person. Siddha is the one who has the siddhis.
As I push up my glasses and open my books.
Technically correct is the worst kind of correct. No, that's very fair. Yeah, I think Buddhism talks about the different progressions of the bodhisattva, and that there are siddhis that come along with that. But I've always taken it to, outward displays of spiritual power have nothing to do with spiritual awakening whatsoever. They can be thought of as separate. So, yeah.
Yeah, in fact, for those who believe in that sort of thing, there are many admonitions in both Hindu, Buddhist, even mystical Christian traditions that tell the spiritual student, don't get deceived, don't get sidetracked by the seemingly magical things that can occur along the spiritual path. Like if you start to have visions, or if things are floating around, or if you're levitating, or if you're having telepathy or whatnot, like that, don't let that be a distraction. And I wholeheartedly agree with that. That is very much a distraction. But of course,
do you know people who've gotten really distracted by that in the progress of their path?
Yeah, I do.
Yeah.
Actually, I do. I know a couple of people who would otherwise be very devoted spiritual students who, I remember in college I had several friends who were hardcore students, and then for a short period of time really got into paranormal phenomenon, like really wanted to understand telekinesis, moving objects with their mind, and telepathy, and that was what they cared about, right? And not that it's a bad thing. That very much, for all I know, might have been a very important part of their spiritual journey. Like they needed to go through understanding that and opening their mind to those sort of things. But at some point, you need to come back to doing the work, which is to say, healing guilt, your sense of separation, you're feeling the delusion that you think you are a separate self, right?
Yeah, which I think is really great. One of the great things about Rumi is his constant focus on love, his constant focus on the heart, which is really when you're that fully in the state of the heart, it's pretty much impossible to. I won't say impossible. Maybe it's a possibility, but it's very, very difficult to become distracted by those things. Yeah,
that's a really good point. More and more, I think even in our conversations, like I notice when we come back to love, everything works, and it's not like it's a love in the cheesy sense, but truly and honestly understanding that to be of service and to be helpful and to help another, to have compassion for each other, that is such an integral part of the path of any tradition. It doesn't matter whether you're Christian or Muslim or Buddhist or Jewish or anything. It's like compassion and love is that thread that is the core of it.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. So with that said, I think that's a great transition. I mentioned at the beginning, we wanted to talk a little bit about the teacher and the role of the teacher. So I'd love it if we dove into that. I know I think we could probably keep reading poetry. But do you know much about, do you speak anything about the transition that Rumi had after he met his teacher, regardless of the way in which he met him?
Yeah.
Because I'm curious if in Sufism, I'm assuming that the role of the teacher is very similar to any sort of, serious student-teacher relationship in any tradition.
Yeah, absolutely. So a couple of things. Well, let me just share a nice story here about Shams.
Wait, can I read it? Can I finish off this? This tale about the heart? I want to. This is from 127.
Okay.
One page of our book will bewilder you forever. One real moment at the feet of the heart will turn you from teachers into disciples.
Love that. Yeah. I had one of my Catholic family members was a very, very religious, very devoted student of Jesus and Mother Mary. And I remember she told me that she saw Jesus as the ultimate follower, the ultimate disciple. And I that was when I was young, in France, that sort of turned things around for me, because I kind of always imagined in my mind, as a young impressionable mind, when you go to church and you see this huge statue of Jesus, you think like he's the leader. Like this is what everyone is following this guy, right? I mean, in the Christian world at least. And everyone talks about him like, of course, he's the leader.
Right.
But then for her to say he was the ultimate disciple, like that changed things for me. It changed how I viewed him, and it also changed how I viewed what it meant to be on the spiritual path. To be a disciple.
What do you tell me more about that? I mean, I mean, this is. I guess we can use this. I guess we can use this as a transition, because we could talk about that relationship and what being a disciple means and what a teacher is trying to do, and even how even the greatest teachers are the greatest disciples. Yeah.
Well, I think this is maybe a little superficial, but I think it's at least the very first level that we can look about this, or look at this, which is to say that in order to be a student, one needs to be willing to learn. One needs to be a good student. One needs to acknowledge that you don't know. Right? It's like the whole idea with, how am I supposed to fill a cup that's already full? Right? The master who pours tea to the student, right? Like, you need to have an empty cup.
Can I just say, just for clarification in this conversation, when we're talking about we're not knowing, I don't think you're speaking about, like, in terms of if you wanted to learn physics, you go to a teacher and say, like, well, I already know the general concepts of gravity, and I know the kind of like the basic equations. Like, I'm really coming to you for like some more advanced like mathematical equations, but I already know a lot, right? We're not talking about that kind of knowing. We're talking about not that kind of learning, of like learning facts or learning,
Well, I think
clarify that.
Yeah. Well, I think that actually is a good example. If I was a physics student and I came to a teacher and said, I already know cosmology. I have this great idea. I already know everything. I need you to validate how great I am as a person, right? Like, that is that's what I'm getting at. That's a student who's coming to the teacher with a full cup, right? They are seeking an external validation for their own glory, right? as opposed to a good student who would say, I really don't know. Even though they do, even though they may be at the smartest in the class, they will come to the teacher and say, there's so much that I don't know. In fact, you'll find this in many traditions. Experts in a particular field, the further you go down a rabbit hole in becoming an expert on a single thing, the more you will realize how little you actually know about that thing. And only they are able to truly see how little they know. I'll speak on as a neurologist, right? For those who truly, truly devote themselves to the study of neurology and who go even deeper into one specific subspecialty within neurology, only they are truly able to realize how little we actually know about the brain. Truly get that we know next to nothing. That's the kind of I don't know spirit that I speak of that a student has.
Okay, cool. So I think I kind of stopped you, and you might have gone further than you had when I stopped you. But
yeah, I think that's what I think of at first when I think of being like the ultimate disciple, is coming with the empty cup.
Okay, got it. So why? Why is that? Why is that important? Why is that a virtue?
Well, I think it's related to humility.
Okay, why is that a virtue? What is humility? What does this mean? I mean, there people, all sorts of people listening to this.
Yeah,
what does humility mean in this context?
Yeah, it's a really good question. Well, I'll take a stab at it, but then I want your opinion. Well, I mean, there's a sort of utilitarian aspect, right? If I'm not willing to learn and I'm not open, then I won't learn, right? I mean, just fundamentally, I'm not going to advance in my understanding of any particular subject if I don't understand that there's more I can learn, but I need to be willing to acknowledge that, to be humble about it. Yeah, and so I think spiritually, but there's another thing too. Okay, this is probably the next step that I would say. It's interesting in most other fields, accumulation is the name of the game. You acquire more and more knowledge. In many ways, this famous Sanskrit phrase "neti neti," which means not this, not that, in relation to how do you describe God, right? You can't say what God is, but you can describe what God isn't, and process of elimination.
Right.
But I feel like that phrase really gets at the core of what the spiritual path is, as opposed to other forms of knowledge, other paths of knowledge, which is that it's really a falling away of what isn't. So as a student on the spiritual path, that which furthers the dissolution of the ego is fundamentally helpful, and I think humility does that.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah, it's beautiful. Thank you.
Yeah. What are your thoughts about being a disciple versus a teacher?
I think humility is, I feel like if there's one single quality that a disciple needed to have or to continue to develop, it's humility. There's the most famous books on Zen in the English language, Zen Mind, Beginner's Mind, is all about cultivating beginner's mind, which is just that space of, it's a space of open. The thing about humility is that it's openness. It I won't say forces, because it's too strong of a word for this context, but it opens you, and it admitting I don't know, being a bit lost, is a really profound place. And I really feel like only when we are willing to admit that we're lost, the opportunity arises to be found. And not in a, not, I mean, you could talk about in terms of like language, like, yeah, that's the opposite of being lost. But like that, my interactions haven't, my most profound and positive interactions have only come when I have admitted that I'm lost and not tried to know the answer to everything. And in fact, if a teacher you're close with gets a whiff that you think you know what you're talking about, a lot of them can be pretty quick to smack you down a few pegs. But I want to respect. I want to respect the time of this episode. I do think that I think we touched on the most important topic right away, which is humility in terms of teacher-student relationships. I think there's a lot to say about them. I, for one, could talk about the student-teacher relationship ad nauseum infinitely. But I think that humility is really what it comes down to. Like, humility is everything in terms of this teacher and the student, or the student and the teacher, I might add.
Mm-hmm. I absolutely agree. There's a lot to be said for that. And to round off our episode, I'd like to share a little bit about how Shams left Rumi's life.
Okay, and then I want to end with the last poem in the book. But please, but I think that'll be a good way to go out on. But please tell. I want to hear this.
Okay, great. So, all right. So, basically, if we recall, Rumi was an accomplished teacher. He was a master. He was a jurist until he met Shams, and then everything fell apart, and he became this effulgent rose of an ascetic. He became a dervish. He became a poet. You could really see in the language of his poetry, and the fact that he even started to write poetry after he met Shams says everything. Famously, Shams was traveling throughout the Middle East, searching and praying for someone who could, quote, endure my company. Isn't that great? So he's like, I need to find someone who can endure my company. I just totally get that. A voice said to him, this is to Shams, what will you give in return? And Shams replied, my head, which is, in that time, it'd be like, I would give my life away. You're right. The voice then said, the one you seek is Jalaluddin of Konya, who is Rumi. So Shams actually went to find Rumi. That's what initiated their meeting. Now, in terms of how he left Rumi's life, is quite. There's two stories. One is that Rumi's son was jealous of how apparently infatuated Rumi was with Shams, and organized a way to actually have him killed and murdered. That is one version of the story that people took Shams and murdered him and killed him. There's another version of the story which a lot of scholars say is more likely to have happened, and the version is this: on the night of the 5th of December, 1248, as Rumi and Shams were talking, Shams was called to the back door. He went out and was never seen again. It's rumored that he went. It's rumored that he was killed, and so indeed he gave his head for the privilege of their friendship. But the other idea was that he went to another city, which I think is called starts with a K. But he goes to this other city where he lives the rest of his life. Now, I think that's interesting as a student, as a master, when you know your student got what they needed, there's no need for you anymore. And the master just goes. Which, I could totally see Shams doing that. And not having any fanfare about it. Like, not telling Rumi, I will leave now, we will never meet each other again. He was just like, oh, let me go check this one thing back here. And then, pieces out. Yeah. And was never sees him again. So Rumi's love, there's a poem that I want to read that expresses his love written after Shams had left. He writes, "Why should I seek? I am the same as he. His essence speaks through me. I have been looking for myself." Written as he was grieving the loss of Shams.
We could keep talking. We could absolutely keep talking. That's so beautiful. Oh, yeah, the realization that you've been looking for yourself the whole time. All right. Okay. So I want to wrap up here. This has been, I really have loved this conversation. I love how much we focused on the heart. But I want to leave us with the last poem in the book on page 203. And then we'll just say goodbye. We'll just let this end it.
Let's just not even say goodbye. The last word of that poem will be the last
word. Sounds great. I dissolved as a grain of salt in your sea of serenity. Nothing remained. No faith, no certainty, no doubt. In my heart, a star was born, and inside all worlds dissolved.